Hi all. Today I will tell you 4 scary stories. First story. This story happened to me at the end of my first year at university. The school was quiet and peaceful at this time of year when most of the students had already gone home, and I stayed on campus to finish some homework. One evening I decided to spend the night in the library. As usual, it was almost empty, and I took one of the tables in the corner. But as the hours passed, my calmness began to fade. From time to time, I heard rustles and strange sounds from other parts of the library. At first I thought that it was just the creaking of doors or the wind outside the windows, but then the noise began to become more and more strange and inexplicable. Once, when I was immersed in reading, I felt someone touch my shoulder. I shuddered and turned around, but there was no one around me. It was strange and frightening, but I decided that it was my imagination and continued to work. Later, when I got up to take the book from the shelf, it fell off the shelf as if someone had pulled it out. I was alone in the library, and it couldn't be accidental. My nerves started to falter, and then I heard a voice. He was weak and insistent, whispering my name. "Michael, Michael," the voice said. I looked around, but there was no one. The voice kept whispering my name, getting closer and closer. Fear gripped me and I ran out of the library without looking back. I couldn't explain what happened, and I didn't even try. From then on, I never stayed on campus after sunset again, and my visit to that library became a memory that I tried to erase from my memory. None of my friends and acquaintances believed me when I told them about this incident, and I'm not even sure if I myself believe what happened. But one thing I know for sure is that that night changed me and made the world around me a little more mysterious and scary. As several years passed after that incident in the library, I decided to return to university to complete my degree. However, fear and dissatisfaction with this mysterious story have always been with me. While I was getting back to studying, I avoided the library, especially in the evening, and tried not to stay on campus after sunset. But, as often happens, fate decided to play with me. I had to visit the library due to urgent research work. One such evening, as I stood in the library, busy with my study materials, there was something strange in the room. The air became heavy and cold, and my nerves began to tremble. I tried to ignore it and focus on the task, but something was wrong. And then, as I peered into the pages of the book, an image of a woman appeared before me. She was pale, with longing eyes, and her hair was wet, as if she had just come out of the water. She slowly approached me, step by step, and I was paralyzed with fear. Suddenly, she started whispering my name, just like she did last time. "Michael, Michael, help me." The voice was weak and bitter. I didn't know what to do. My hand was shaking, and I couldn't move. But this time, something was different. I resolutely got up and ran to the exit of the library without looking back. Horror surged through my heart, but I knew it was an unusual and mystical occurrence, and my own survival was paramount. Since then, I have not returned to that library and avoided any strange places or phenomena. My life went on, but that night and that woman always remained a mystery and a reminder that there are many mysterious and terrible things in this world that we may never understand. Second story. This story happened to me a few years ago when I was in high school. This day was normal, and our PE class ended as usual. After an intense workout, many of us decided to head to the shower room to freshen up. The shower room at our school was in an old building, and it always seemed a little abandoned and gloomy to me. All the students walked there together, noisily discussing their lessons and sporting achievements. But when we entered the shower room, something seemed strange to me. Water flowed from old and rusty taps, creating an eerie creaking sound. The room was filled with thick steam, and I felt it squeezing my throat. I decided to ignore my anxiety and started to wash myself. But when I closed my eyes, I heard something strange, a whisper coming from behind a nearby curtain. At first, I thought it was just other students talking, but the whispered words made me shudder. These were strange and incomprehensible words, like some kind of rite or spell. I decided to peek behind the curtain to find out what was going on, and my heart pounded even faster when I saw what was behind it. There was a curly figure covered in wet hair, and his eyes sparkled in the darkness. The figure stood motionless, as if waiting for something. I decided to run out of the shower room, but the door was locked. I started banging and screaming, but no one answered. The steam hung over me, and I felt it weigh the air down. The figure approached me, and the whispering became louder and more awkward. Finally, the door suddenly opened, and I ran outside, followed by laughter. He still haunts me in my nightmares. This incident changed me forever, and I never went into the shower room again after physical education. Several days have passed since that strange incident in the school shower room, but the horror and anxiety I experienced continued to overwhelm me. I told my friends about this and learned that they had recently heard about similar strange events at school. One of my friends said that he even had to see some kind of shadow in the corridors of the school at night. Another said he heard strange noises from the shower room when no one was there. All this frightened us, and we decided to conduct our own investigation. One day after school, we decided to sneak into the shower room and try to unravel the mysterious whispers and shadows that haunted us. We went to the shower room with flashlights and mobile phones to light up the dark corners. When we entered, the air was so tense that it seemed as if it was shaking with fear. We got inside, and I couldn't believe my eyes. Before us stood the same figure that I had seen that day. She was covered in wet hair, and her eyes sparkled in the gloom. We started screaming and running, but the door suddenly closed on us, and we found ourselves in a locked shower room. The figure was approaching, and the whispering became louder and more painful. We tried to figure out who she is and what she wants, but she didn't answer our questions. She simply whispered unintelligible words, as if trying to terrify us. Finally, when the fear was at the limit, the door suddenly opened, and we ran outside, as if rushing to the rescue. We told teachers and parents about this incident, but no one believed us. Since then, we no longer tried to investigate those strange events in our school. However, I am left with nightmares and memories of how fear can suddenly take over us when we are faced with the unknown and the mystical. Third story. My name is Emily, and my story began when I was a high school student at a small school on the outskirts of town. It all started with the arrival of a new teacher at our school. His name was Mr. Darkwood, and he looked really strange. Mr. Darkwood was a tall man with black hair, always wearing a black coat and strange dark glasses that hid his eyes. He never smiled or showed any emotion. His lessons were unusual. He taught us about black magic, love spells, and even demons. At first it seemed to me that this was just an unusual style of teaching, but as the lessons continued, something began to bother me. Mr. Darkwood often paid attention to me. His cold gaze and strange comments made me shiver. Over time, Mr. Darkwood began to appear in my life outside of school. He followed me in the corridors of the school, appeared near my house, and I felt his presence, even when he was out of my sight. One day, when I was returning home after school, I saw him in the distance. He followed me, hiding in the shade of the trees. I felt fear, which began to cover me more and more. I told my parents what happened, but they couldn't believe that a teacher could be so strange and intrusive. They told me that perhaps it was my imagination and asked me to beware of it. Every day my life became worse. Mr. Darkwood continued to follow me, and I could no longer endure this nightmare. I decided to do something, but I didn't know what exactly. It's been a few weeks since my life became a real nightmare because of Mr. Darkwood. He continued to haunt me, and the fear grew stronger every day. But I couldn't just sit back and wait for something to change. I decided to do my own research. Every time Mr. Darkwood came into my line of sight, I tried to notice as many details as I could about his movements and behavior. I recorded his every appearance and kept track of where he went after he disappeared from my field of vision. My efforts revealed a strange pattern of his movements. He seemed to always be in certain places, and these places, as it turned out, were connected with some old and gloomy buildings in the city. One of these buildings was abandoned and shrouded in mystery. I decided to go to this abandoned building to find answers. It was a wooden building that looked like it had been abandoned for many years. As I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I heard strange sounds coming from afar. Following the sounds, I reached the door, which was ajar. Cautiously, I peered inside and saw Mr. Darkwood standing in front of some ancient altar. He was reading something in an unknown language and noticed me. Mr. Darkwood looked at me with an icy look and said, "You shouldn't have come here, Emily. Now you will know the true power." He began to cast some strange spells, and incredible things began to happen in the room. The light from the candles went out, and mysterious sounds began to sound in the room. I realized that Mr. Darkwood was indeed dealing with something mystical and powerful. Mr. Darkwood continued to cast his strange spells, and the room filled with sinister energy. I was surrounded by darkness, and fear seized me. Suddenly, the floor under my feet began to slip, and I began to fall down. I didn't have time to think. I fell into the basement, and the door slammed shut behind me. The lights and sounds from the room above disappeared, leaving me in complete darkness. My heart was pounding with fear, and I knew that I was trapped by Mr. Darkwood. I began to carefully feel the walls, trying to find a way out. The basement was cold and damp, and the smell of moss and mold was everywhere. At some point, I heard some steps from above, and it seemed to me that someone was approaching. And suddenly I heard the voice of a friend who found my trail and went in search. He heard my screams and started banging on the basement door, shouting my name. I rushed to the door and started punching it until it finally opened. My friend pulled me out of the dark basement, and we fled from this dark place. Mr. Darkwood had disappeared, and I hoped he would never return. This terrible story changed me forever. We told the police about what happened, but Mr. Darkwood disappeared, and there was no trace of him. But I knew that he remained somewhere in the shadows, and I will always remember the nightmare that he brought into my life. Fourth story. Summer was coming to an end, and we, a group of teenagers, were getting bored. We lived in a small town where there is not much entertainment, and we wanted something exciting. One day, at a school party, we heard rumors about an old abandoned school a few kilometers from where we live. The stories about her were mysterious and dark, and we wanted to know the truth. We made a group of 4 friends, me, Mike, Jenny, and Tom. The plan was simple. We decided to break into the abandoned school at night to find out what was really going on there. We told our parents that we were going to Tom's at night and that we would be safe. The night was cold and dark as we approached the old school building. It stood far from the other buildings, surrounded by forest, and looked ghostly. The building was in a deplorable state. The windows were broken, the walls were overgrown with moss, and the old wooden benches lay scattered around the yard. We got inside through one of the broken windows. There was a gloomy atmosphere inside, and we lit the way with flashlights. The sound of our footsteps bounced off the walls, creating ghostly echoes. The first thing that caught our eye was the old boards with the names of graduates and dates. Some of them were long forgotten, while others seemed mysterious. We walked along the corridors, and every rustle or creak caused us excitement and fear. At some point, we heard some whispers, but could not determine where they were coming from. This began to make our adventure even more mysterious and scary. As we continued our exploration, however, something began to change. Our atmosphere of fun and excitement gave way to something more sinister. Strange premonitions began to overwhelm us, and the place that seemed interesting and mysterious began to frighten us. We continued to explore the abandoned school, despite the strange sensations that came over us. Every rustle or shadow seemed threatening to us, but we did not want to show ourselves in front of each other and continued to move deeper into the building. Going down to the basement, we found a dark room filled with old school resources and books. It was quiet and cold here, and the air smelled of antiques and flies. We were looking around for something interesting when Mike came across an old diary, forgotten among the books. He began to read it aloud. These were notes by a former student of that school, and they got weirder as I read them. The student wrote about something incomprehensible phenomena and ghosts that he saw in this school. His notes were filled with fear and despair. Suddenly, in a dark corner of the room, we heard something that made us freeze. They were footsteps slowly approaching us. Mike's flashlight went out, and we were left in total darkness. We started to panic, and the footsteps got closer. Very quickly, something was approaching us, and we felt our fear reach the limit. At that moment, I heard a faint whisper, as if a ghost was trying to tell us something, but we couldn't make out the words. Our fear was unbearable, and we rushed to the exit without looking back. We ran out of the abandoned school and ran home without looking back. Our adventure left an unforgettable impression on us, and we did not want to know anything more about that gloomy school. But I still have the feeling that we have awakened something sinister and mysterious that was hiding inside the old building.